Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it too. And I got to tell you, I reckon that it ought to be a little bit easier to go green after you've seen the shellacking that the Democratic Party delivered to itself. And today we're going to be joined by Shahid Buttar. Shahid is a constitutional lawyer. He's a poet. He's an artist, a musician, a snowboarder, and a personal friend of mine. Shahid, welcome back to the program.
Always great to be with you, David. Thanks so much for inviting me.
So look at here, man. I will jump right into it, Shahid, because here we are, like 1 week away from just an absolute shellacking. I don't know how else to say it. Just the Donald Trump and the Republican Party just opened up a can of whoop ass on the Democratic Party. But I really believe that we have to say, like, the Democratic Party did this to themselves. And I'm going to invite you to either correct me or just share what the hell just happened last week.
I'm absolutely with you. I mean, this was much more a case of the Democratic Party losing elections for all three elected branches of government, right? The Senate, the House, and the White House. And the judiciary obviously is indirectly appointed through the White House, but every election at the national level that the Democrats could squander institutionally, they did. And it's important to contrast that performance with the way voters, for instance, in Missouri, where I grew up, voted on ballot measures. This was not a rejection of progressive ideas. Voters in a red state voted to increase the minimum wage, right? That's a perfect example of how populist policies that meet the material conditions of struggling families win in this country. And that, of course, is something that the Democrats simply could not get behind because the corporate backers that bankroll the party limit the imagination of the candidates who run under that banner. And I say this having been a Democratic candidate. I won a congressional primary, and I experienced what happens when you run as a Democrat for a visionary agenda that actually aligns with the needs of the future and working Americans. And at the end of the day, when I look at the Harris campaign, so many failures emerge. The top line to me is genocide. You cannot support a genocide by sending American arms to a country with no respect for international human rights and then claim to be in any way a candidate aligned with human rights. And that's exactly what the Harris campaign did by aligning itself closely with the Biden administration. And this is when Dr. King talks about racism and militarism and capitalism intersecting, this is a sort of nefarious and kind of disgusting lens through which to observe that intersection. The current time slice reveals those intersections in no uncertain terms. And the idea that Harris is going to run as, on her demographics, effectively as the first woman president, as, the second mixed race president, while being a part of this heinous, ongoing, even escalating and expanding violation of human rights and destabilization of the entire international community, it renders the claim to be better than the alternative somewhat laughable. And I just put out an article yesterday. It was one of those anniversary prompts from an online social media network that I hate, and it led me to an interview I'd done 5 years ago on Veterans Day. And it was interesting to hear journalist Matt Taibbi in that interview. At the time, he was with Rolling Stone. So it was 2019. And he said, it really sounds, referring to the 2020 election, it really sounds like the Democrats are just trying the same thing they did in 2016, running against Trump and centering their campaigns against him. And of course, that's exactly what the Harris campaign did in this past cycle. And the idea of running as an antithesis while offering nothing substantive to meet the needs of people that are struggling to survive a predatory corporate economy is a recipe for electoral disaster. And so many progressives and revolutionaries of various stripes get pushed into supporting the party because they think there's no better alternative, when I think, we saw a pretty vivid demonstration last week of how, whether it is by design or whether it is a reflection of incompetence or corruption, or perhaps some intersection among those different vectors, the party cannot be relied upon for anything. I mean, one of the things that enrages me particularly about this whole dynamic is how the Democratic Party calls itself democratic, when even that's a principle that the party betrays and abuses at every opportunity. When you look at the way, for instance, that they both message towards and even litigate in court towards alternative parties that don't have the same reach, it's a perfect reflection that that party has no concern for democracy at all. It is a careerist party for center-right neoliberals. And of course, that's not going to win an election against, and I should make this point really double underlined, against a threat that Democrats created themselves. It is so important to remind everyone where Trump came from politically, right? There's all these pictures with him with the Clintons. They encouraged him to run because they thought in 2016 he'd be easier to beat than Jeb Bush. So whenever, people want to, run around screaming bloody murder about Trump, just remind them that Trump was a creation of the Clintons. And that is the unfortunate and horrifying world that we live in at the moment.
So thank you so much, Shahid. Once again, dropping truth bombs left and right. So let me make sure that I understand your point and see if we are in agreement here. One, the Democratic Party squandered an election that was theirs to win. Number one, because of the absolute enthusiastic support for genocide in Gaza. And this unwavering support of both the Biden and Harris administration includes, and I just want to underscore and remind viewers and listeners of Redneck Gone Green, not even allowing 5 minutes of platform time at their convention to a Palestinian American legislator who, despite everything I just said, wanted to endorse them, but not even allowing that person on stage. So a huge insult to a constituency and genocide. That's number one. Number two, the fact that the Democratic Party has completely abandoned the working class over the last 4 decades, while constantly and repeatedly enriching the bankers, the financial elites, corporate America, not only allowing inequality, but literally promoting inequality while tolerating a tsunami of mass layoffs. So number two, a complete and thorough abandonment of the working class. Number three,
point in there just to underscore your number point too.
Please.
With labor, I always think about Biden and the rail workers. The rail workers tried to strike in, I think this would have been the fall of 2021, maybe in the middle of the pandemic. And then what they were striking over particularly was the right to sick days. There's a global pandemic. They're trying to protect public health and their own. And Joe Biden, who, is very quick to brag about being the first president in US history to walk a picket line, like, spare me the theater, right? Show up in the ways that you could. And he blocked a rail worker strike because it was, would have been bad for the economy. And that's a reflection of where his sympathies lie, Wall Street, not working people. And, all the theater, all the talking points, all the rhetoric aside, you see in the action where the loyalties lie. And I thought that was one of the most revealing moments of his administration that, frankly, nobody seems to remember. I mean, it's bizarre to me that, I know that we live in a sort of, civilization with an attention span of 10 seconds, but still, it's a really important moment that I think historians, I hope, focus on more than journalists.
So thank you so much, because that is another point I want to make. And that is, yes, the Clintons encouraged Donald Trump to run, and journalists have a large responsibility for what we just witnessed as well.
No question. No question. Journalists are the cheerleaders for neoliberal industrial predatory capitalism and the militarism that enables it. And every time you see a journalist report on election prognostication, they're basically performing that function of cheerleaders, reinforcing effectively the current distribution of power. I had this exchange with, I think it was Ken Klippenstein, who was a former journalist from The Intercept, who now writes, like you and I, on Substack. And he has a really thoughtful and important, I dare say, column. And we had this it was either in the comments on one of his articles or maybe a subscriber chat somewhere, but he agreed that prognostication, which is what most election coverage is absolutely and literally meaningless. It's not probative of anything. It doesn't serve any public function. It doesn't illuminate in any way the issues for the electorate or differentiate the candidates. The horse race character of news coverage is an active disservice to democracy. And the idea that that's what Americans get by way of news about politics it would be laughable if it did not enable this machine run amok that is destroying the biosphere and life on Earth.
Right. I mean, it would be comic if it wasn't so fucking tragic.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that.
And, Shahid, the other point that you made earlier that I want to circle back to is the thoroughly and completely undemocratic, dare I say anti-democratic manner of how Harris secured the nomination. There was no primary. It's like in every way you look back at this train wreck. But the thing is, you and I were predicting this. I do want to, I'm not trying to say I told you so in some sort of way. What I'm trying to underscore to viewers and listeners of Redneck Gone Green, and that is actual socialists, actual leftists were yelling and screaming, there is a problem. You are messing up. And they literally told us, sit down, shut up, get to the back of the bus. And yet here we are.
And we're not the only ones who predicted this. Political scientists for decades have predicted this. If candidates become unresponsive to the needs of their base, they lose. It's that simple. It's not that complicated. And primaries they play a function because they're tests before you show up in the general election to see if the candidate has support. Remember when Kamala Harris ran for the nomination in 2020, she didn't win a single state. Right? She had to withdraw from the race before they even reached the stage of the elections because she ran out of support. And that's a reflection that maybe that's not the best standard bearer for the party,
and
perhaps.
The last thing I'm going to do as we look back on what happened, and that is a conscious decision to make Liz Cheney a functional surrogate. It was more important. The risk that they took was we can get more Republican voters, and that our own base will show up anyway. And they were proven wrong. Remember, Donald Trump did not get any more votes than he did when he lost 4 years ago. This is really important to underscore. Harris lost this election because she ran to the right.
My only critique of that is I don't think it was just Harris. I think this was an institutional failure of the party writ large. I mean, she was the candidate, but the process that produced her, to your point, was a quintessential backroom deal. I mean, the process that produced Biden was a quintessential backroom deal. I mean, both of them. And so the idea that you're going to run these insider candidates who have no public support at all, Biden was literally the only person other than Bernie that they could get the rest of the centrists to drop out of the race to rally behind because he had been the vice president. Also, again, chosen through a backroom process. And then this is worth noting, the reason Biden was Obama's vice president, the reason Obama chose him in the first place was because Biden is a stasis agent, not a change agent. He was a brake on any social progress that the Obama administration might have aspired towards. When he nominated or when he chose Biden as his vice president, that was a signal to Wall Street that you don't have to fear me because I'm going to have one of your people inside my administration. And of course, the unfolding story of the Obama administration was its co-optation by capital at every conceivable turn. And so Biden did his job. Both, absolutely. They intersect.
Let's not forget the foreign policy of the Obama administration.
Sure. Which is, I go back and forth on Biden about this. I mean, there's the genocide, obviously, which is full stop. I particularly think about Afghanistan, and I don't know if there's another figure in Washington who could have pulled us out of that country. Biden spent 40 years basically as a hawk in the Senate. And so when he had his hands on the reins, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, he got a lot of criticism for. I actually think it was the one thing he did right was to end a 20-year boondoggle that had been based on lies at every point in the process. You know, remember where we found Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan, not Afghanistan, right? And, you know, where we've hurled billions of dollars in military aid. I mean, just none of it makes any sense. And that's a point that, just to get back to the point you raised, that to these people, Democratic elites, the consultants, the candidates, the people who make the money, none of them know what the hell is going on either. You know, when they are running Liz Cheney as a surrogate, what they're saying is, we think it's 1980.
Right.
You know, they have this construction of 1980s America, the whole Russiagate thing, same thing. You know, it's like, oh, Russia, Cold War, that was half a century ago. And these people are in that world, trapped in that world, chaining the future to their own, you know, moribund careers and, you know, inability to look up and see what time it is. And I, you know, go ahead, please.
Well, I was looky here. Like we've spent 17 minutes now, basically in full agreement. Although you did correct me a couple of times, which I will agree. It wasn't merely Harris. It was
you corrected me once too.
Failure, right?
That goes both ways.
Yeah, no, this is great. Like I will always stand to be corrected, and I think that you did properly correct me. It was not merely Harris. I'm going to shift us into what is to be done, and to be clear, yes, that is absolutely a reference to Lenin's famous pamphlet. What is to be done, Shahid? I've got some ideas, but I'm going to invite you, if you were in a position to say, all right, well, let's actually say everything that Cobb and Buttar have just said, then what should the movement, what should ordinary people, what should we be doing now?
So I can offer advice for ordinary people. I got to be honest, like I lost all hope in the movement, you know, just in my own experience. I kind of learned that the movement has the, you know, self-awareness of, and that I don't have any faith or trust in the movement, but I do have faith and trust in my neighbors. And, you know, what that particularly points me towards is just mutual aid. It's kind of uncorruptible. It's local. We're all going to need it in any number of ways. And so looking for ways to support your neighbors, right? Whether that's a soup club where you're cooking for each other, whether it's finding ways to pool your resources. You know, someone needs a space for a project and someone has space for a project, you know, like just finding ways to work outside the formal economy to meet your needs as communities, I think is kind of like the most important thing we can do at the moment, both to meet the needs of people as the crisis of this civilization grows more acute, and also to, frankly, build the networks that we will need to mobilize if this ship really hits the sand. You know, if there's a right-wing militia that shows up in your town, you're going to want to know your neighbors, and you're going to want to know that they have your back. And, you know, one way to do that is to break bread together, look out for each other, help each other. Go ahead. I saw you had a thought.
No, I really appreciate that. And I am reflecting a bit on certainly the movement failed you as a candidate when you ran as an unabashed left socialist candidate for Congress. The movement did not have your back there. It was really heartbreaking for me to watch. I also think that this idea of how ordinary people can come together and convene and to find the power that they have. I mean, you know, I forget who it was who said that the biggest way that people give up power is not realizing that they have it in the first instance. And to me, Shahid, one of the things that I think is really important is to really push ourselves to ask, like, do we actually know our neighbors? Are we engaged with them on in any kind of meaningful way? Like what I'm not interested in doing is merely being a participant in my own echo chamber or silo. I do think that we should be lifting each other up. That's what here at Redneck Gone Green we try to do. It's why I was so happy to repost your excellent article on Substack. Definitely want more and need more of that. But that also is no substitute for the kind of mutual aid with the people with whom you live, work, play, and pray every day. And that I wonder if we're doing a very good job on the left.
Well, I don't know about this is what I say, that I lost faith in the movement, the left. I don't know what those things even mean anymore. And you know, to me, I've tried to just and I read the news, I write about things beyond my reach, but I try to just contain my action to my reach. And just to throw out potential sort of models for people who want to come together with, your neighbors, clothing swaps are a really easy way to get people in a room together and pool resources. Everybody's got stuff in their closet that they need to get rid of. Everybody needs some threads. This is especially true for people with kids, because, give that, you don't need your kids' old clothes, and somebody down the street probably does. So clothing swaps, I really am big on the whole soup piece, just making food for people. And, ideally rotating that around a community. I have a couple friends here, we do that, and I find it not just interpersonally and intra-communally bonding, but things emerge from settings when people get together to break bread. Projects emerge, collaborations, visions, ideas, inspirations. It's inchoate. It is beyond the sum of its parts, and everybody's got to eat. So just finding those opportunities to get people together to share. I think that's kind of the name of the game for me, at least at the moment. That's something I can touch and feel and see, and I've kind of lost a lot of faith in the things I can.
So I'm really glad you brought up, you called it a clothing swap, which yes. And what I'll say is yes. And to lift up the really, really free market concept. I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase or term, Shahid, but
I haven't seen one of those in like a decade, but yeah, drop the science.
This is the thing though. What I want to just share with viewers and listeners, the really, really free market is an idea of a truly horizontally organized collective of individuals who form a temporary market, but it's based on a gift economy. The idea is not that we're buying and selling things for a profit, but instead we're just giving things away. And ultimately, these are not dependent on any large organization, although I know Cooperation Jackson has been running a really, really free market once a month at a department or a property that they own. But the point is that they can sprout up anywhere, and it counteracts capitalism in a very proactive way by creating a positive example to question the myth of scarcity and competition. Like, to me, the really, really free market is clothing swap plus, right? It's like to convene a space where we share with one another, and it could be food, it could be clothing, it could be skills, it could be ideas. It is almost a carnivalesque kind of approach to a quote market. And so that to me is something that I'm making a pledge that I'm going to do at least one of once the weather breaks. Here in Humboldt County, the winter months are not a great time to do an outdoor event, but in the spring, I'm going to try a really, really free market and see what happens.
And what I like about that model too is it's relatively public facing. It's sort of like if what I was suggesting before is a little more private or contained within social networks, the really, really free market offers an opportunity for a small number of people to invite more participation, more things to receive, more things to give, more connections to build. For people who might be intimidated by something that is public, just the idea of a gift economy is so profound, and we all have already encountered them, particularly within our families. Families operate on the basis of a gift economy. Close partners often operate as a closed gift economy. The gift economy, whether you're applying that to a really, really free market, with people who might be responding to a public invitation, maybe you put up flyers in the bulletin boards at the cafes and grocery stores, whatever. But even if you just apply the principle of a gift economy within your friend set, if it feels intimidating to reach out and connect with new people, just think about connecting more deeply with the people you already know and building those community threads more intentionally. And any opportunity you can find to embody that principle is going to get there. And it doesn't even have to be about resources. The most profound gift I think we have to offer each other usually is time.
Right.
And, when you have homies who are going through something, just finding ways to show up for them, or if there's ways for community support, mobilizing your friends to show up for them. I actually think of that as some of the most impactful activism I've done recently, and I'm grateful for the chance to have played that role as other people have played that role for me. It's that is the grist from which community emerges, and time's free. As much as this world pushes us all to relentless busyness, there is always time to be found when you need it for things that you take seriously enough. And so a big part of the gift economy is about expanding your sense of self to encompass the people around you so that their needs matter enough to you to make things happen as they're needed. And I think that idea of communities responding to the needs of the people within them is increasingly important, because the market, not the really, really free market, but the so-called free, in fact, predatory market, the market is poised to meet our needs in an extractive way. And the model that we're talking about is one that is much more generative. And I do think that we have to look for all the, not just generative models we can, but if we think about particularly this idea of like, yeah, and I keep going back to the clothing swap because it's just one I've seen work really well in the community I live in here. If you zoom back from the interpersonal and community aspects of it, reduce, reuse, recycle is a mantra we've all internalized with respect to environmental preservation. Use that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, everything you could buy, you can probably find somewhere else. So,
right?
Recycling is a concept.
And wait a minute, like it doesn't take much to say, why if you like, why does every home need a lawnmower? Like, why, and we can, the idea here is, and I'm actually going to really lean in here, the difference between surplus value, commodity value, and use value. Those are economic terms, and the idea of use value is you create goods and services for use, period. Like, and the commodity approach is you make things in order to sell them at a profit, right? Like, this is at its nature one of the key components of capitalism. It's why I am such a fervent anti-capitalist or a post-capitalist. Like, I think we have to get over this economic system that is driving a relentless consumerism and materialism, all for profit, and it's destroying the planet. This is the thing that really fucking gets me. We're literally destroying the planet, and really it's only benefiting a very small, minuscule portion of the human population. And by the way, anybody who's watching and or listening to this podcast after the fact, if you claim that you are a capitalist, my question to you is, do you own the means of production, or are you dependent on your human labor that you sell for a wage? Because if you own the means of production, then you are a capitalist. If what you really means are, I support capitalism, even though I don't own the means of production and I sell my wage, my labor, the correct term for that is not being a capitalist. The correct term for that is being a bootlicker. That's what really gets me. I'm sorry if it sounds too harsh, but I'm really had it up to here with people who are absolutely committing to an economic system that is literally extracting from them.
Well, and so much of it relates to this aspiration, the hope, or I've heard it described as, every American is a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, and like this idea of and it gets back to one of the reasons why the gift economy is so important, because it's about taking, as opposed to aspiring to stand in a different position in a stratified society, it's about collapsing the strata so there are no strata, so we don't have to necessarily climb, right? And it's that aspiration to climb, to consume, that I think drives so much of our civilizational dysfunction. And as you're talking about this idea of, I just want to really bring back this whole point about the community aspect of the moment, that the more we try to internalize what our country and communities are going through as individuals, the more alienating it is, and you invoked Lenin earlier, one of the greatest geniuses or just concepts I've sort of internalized from that entire line of thinking was the alienating force of capital. capitalism alienates us from each other. It reduces us to, that's not a human being. That's the person serving my coffee. That's not a human being. That's the person changing my oil. We get reduced. It flattens us, and all of the luminosity that we could encounter in each other gets obscured by these roles that we're forced to play, all in the service of this machine. And the grand tragedy of this, to get back to your point about the ecocide that's accelerating, is that it's one thing to serve a machine that is destructive. It's another thing to serve a machine that is self-destructive, and it is destroying everything. And the collective action dilemma that this moment presents, because I don't think, frankly, that even wealthy people have a great deal of influence. Hyper wealthy people do. Like the richest people in the world certainly have a great deal of influence. But if you're garden variety wealthy, I don't frankly know what you do to facilitate the brighter day beyond connect with your neighbors and actually bond with them and share things.
And I want to make a distinction here, or underscore the distinction you made, because I think it's a really important one. The phrase the 1% has gotten a lot of play, but what we have to really understand is we're actually talking about the 0.001%. I mean, there is a billionaire class. You made the distinction between the garden variety wealthy. I really think it's important that we come to understand that the truly parasitic class is actually infinitesimally small, and actually we have the power to actually change this, right? We don't have to accept it. And this is the thing that is really maddening to me, Shahid, and I really think that this is something I'm grappling with, is how to inspire people to actually fully come into their own power and their own humanity.
I mean, to be honest with you, I struggle with inspiring myself to that. Like I'm more or less in the cycle of working to survive. That's kind of what my life is like, and I have writing as an outlet to help me keep from chewing my lip off in frustration, I guess. But inspiration is a thing I've certainly struggled with recently.
That's fair enough. I want to lift up Callie Luna, who wrote in, internalized capitalism. Even I am an object to myself. Thus, everyone is an object to an end, prescribed by billionaires. So thank you, Callie, for that point. And this idea of inspiration is also something I'm kind of grappling with, Shahid, because I use the phrase how to inspire people to want more. And I also have to acknowledge that, and I just have to acknowledge that I am incredibly blessed because of two things. One, I know it's a happy coincidence of my biochemistry, right? My neuro, I don't think there is such a thing as a true neurotypical, because I think we're all so sort of unique, but I tend towards everything's going to be all right. I tend towards happiness. I don't have the kind of anxiety and worry that I know a lot of people get just because of how their neurons fire. That, by the way, I didn't do a damn thing for. That was just the goddess said, you get to be lucky that way. So, but the other thing is, and I want to lift up my mama. Many people who know, if y'all know me, know I'm an unabashed mama's boy, right? And I had the great fortune and good luck to be born into a family where I knew from the second of my consciousness that I was loved, that I was wanted, that and my mama and my mama and my papa, who raised me, like three adult figures constantly in my life, who were just constantly reinforcing that I was wanted, there was a place in the world for me, and that I had gifts, and get this, Shahid, that I had to offer them properly. So I got a level of very loving discipline and nurturing to say, here are the things, be concerned about other people. Like I was taught empathy and kindness and compassion, and I received empathy and kindness and compassion. And what I've realized is what a great gift that was in my formative years, that I'm now realizing, oh, so many people don't get that.
Well, and to give that to each other is, those are some of the most priceless gifts that we can offer, right? When we talk about time, like what is that more than empathy and kindness? right? To share that level of ourselves with the people around us, I think can go a long way to insulate each of us from, the challenges that we're all going to be embracing will, I think, only grow more acute in the time to come.
Listen, and I do think that, like, so yes to all of that, and we cannot shirk what is coming, and that is the Trump administration and the neoliberal project are absolutely going to be coming after immigrants, transgendered people, other queers. They're going to be coming after black and brown skinned people. Like, we have to protect ourselves and each other. And we nobody's coming to save us, Shahid. That's the thing that I'm really coming to. Whether it's the political economy and the producing and distribution of goods and services, or just basic physical protection, we're all we've got.
I think there are two settings I want to make this really vivid for people in. One, when you talk about the coming crackdown on immigrants, and we haven't exactly had it easy in the last generation, but people have all read about the Underground Railroad in the era of chattel slavery, and we might need a bunch of those again. And I would encourage people to think about how to strategically redeploy whatever privileges you have, whether that's a house with a basement, whether that's, electronic devices that you can use to keep in touch with people. I'll note here that my former colleagues at the Electronic Frontier Foundation developed a bunch of digital privacy tools, particularly for people who are concerned about that kind of scrutiny from government immigration enforcement authorities. Those are tools and practices we can share. The other setting that I think where this community resilience model can get really important is in disaster response. And, one of the unfortunate results of the accelerating global climate catastrophe is that extreme weather events are going to be more frequent. They're going to be more intense. They're going to occur and impact places that are less and less likely. Asheville, North Carolina comes to mind, a place that was a climate haven that, they had apparently a 30-foot storm surge. That's inconceivable. That's so much worse than coastal hurricane communities ever deal with, on orders of magnitude. And, something, whether it's a hurricane or an earthquake or a wildfire, is likely going to come for all of us eventually. And so, it's another reason why this community resilience piece gets so important, because whether in the wake of those events or perhaps, preceding them, to the extent there are, preparations that can be made, those bonds are really, really important, and the market cannot possibly build them. It cannot possibly meet that need. Only communities can meet those needs.
And the thing about mutual aid, so thank you so much for really making that so very real, both the modern Underground Railroad and the return to the idea of mutual aid. Because remember that mutual aid is different than charity, because it's an unconditional coming together and a voluntary exchange of resources to meet shared needs. It's also distinct from just traditional government services because it's peer-to-peer. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that government doesn't have a responsibility. Absolutely, government has a responsibility. But the reality is this government is not discharging its duties and responsibilities. So I believe that this is a call to come together and as ordinary folks to ordinary folks, not saying citizens. I'm not going to use that term because this means ordinary people living together in neighborhoods come together and take care of each other. And done properly, that's what democracy is supposed to be. Democracy means in the Attic Greek, demos, the people, kratio, ruler, power. The people have the power. Like this idea of mitigating circumstances. Again, I continue to vote, Shahid. I continue to engage in electoral politics. I continue to engage in movement work. But I am really making a shift these days into the very concrete ways that we can meet our needs. Community land trust for housing, food production and distribution models, like the really, really free market and other sort of exchanges. Like these are the things that we have the agency to do, and we damn well need to start doing them.
Yeah, I agree. And when you were talking about still voting, I still vote, and I still see opportunities in politics at the local level, right? And I don't ever plan to run for anything, but we've had ballot measures where I live. There was a proposed vacancy tax that was unfortunately rejected by the community, but that's an example of a reform that people can pursue and viably pursue that can make real impact and shift in the lives of of, of families. I'm thinking that just to give the example of the vacancy tax, the idea there is that I live in a place where there are a lot of empty homes, which are like investment properties for people who don't live here, who like to come here during particular times of the year, usually when there's snow. And to the extent we have, I think the number is 7,000 empty homes in this community that has a population of 19,000. So just think about that for a second. Like a huge portion of the housing base is empty. And I have a lot of friends who sleep in their cars, who work at any number of the local businesses. And when the workers have to sleep in our cars so that wealthy people can have second homes that are empty while they're living in some other place, like, it is heinous, it is ridiculous. No, frankly, amount of mutual aid can work ourselves around that kind of problem, right? But local policy, to the extent the vacancy tax, and we certainly hope to run it again in a future cycle, and while it was the subject of literally millions of dollars in corporate misinformation from the real estate lobby, it, I think, inspired a lot of people, and hopefully will eventually pass with the support of the local community once people understand what the nature of the proposal is. But this idea that you tax empty homes and take that money and put it into affordable housing is not rocket science, right?
No, I mean,
that's not.
Again, it's another example, Shahid. Like, we don't have a housing crisis. There are plenty of houses, right? What we have is a policy crisis that treats housing as a commodity to be bought and paid for at a profit. Like, and Callie Luna dropped into the chat something I want to lift up as well. We will need to reorganize health insurance, most likely. Collectivity en masse, we should be able to provide through a people's union of sorts. So the only constructive edit that I would make that is, we don't need to reorganize health insurance. We need to reorganize health care, right? Like, the whole insurance is actually not necessary. What we do need to do, though, is to treat access to health care as a fundamental human right, and then we would be able to do it. And then Callie does point out that San Francisco now has its own basic health insurance plan. I'll confess, I didn't know that. I am very curious to learn more about that. So, Callie, if you want to drop something into the chat about where we can learn about that, I'll make sure to say it out loud so that listeners to the podcast later, or folks who are watching it later, can actually see it. Or Shahid, if you know anything about San Francisco's basic health insurance plan, I'd love to know more.
California has a really robust statewide public insurance program, Medi-Cal. That's the health insurance that I have. We sort of have it's not exactly Medicare for all, and it's far from it, frankly, because it's not single payer in any way, but it does provide a safety net that I don't think most states have an equivalent of.
No, California is the gold standard, as far as I understand, in terms of that basic health coverage plan.
And there's an open question as to whether smaller states have a sufficient resource base to enable analogous public programs, which is exactly why it should be a federal program. And that is the sort of like, it's an economy of scale issue. Any kind of social insurance is ultimately, and so the federal risk pool is big enough that it would make absolute sense. And one of the big tragedies to me of, just going back to where we started this conversation, last week's results, is that no one's even talking about that anymore. 4 years ago, we were talking about visionary solutions to meet the climate crisis. We were talking about finally acknowledging basic human rights in this country and acknowledging the rights that people in other countries have long had to single payer, basically prepaid, tax paid healthcare. And those are not objects of conversation anymore. They're not going to be for some time. And while the Medicare for all conversation and not having it on the table might doom a generation to financial insolvency or any number of preventable health miseries, the fact that we're not going to be talking about urgent, long overdue measures to meet the needs of the future with respect to the climate calamity is a moral blight on all of us, and maybe particularly the Democratic consultants who led our country into this blind alley. But I think, and the journalists who are propagandists on their behalf, but it's, the future will remember this era, I think, unkindly, to the extent, there is a mechanism for memory for social memory. If history survives the coming crisis, I think we will be lucky to be remembered in any way fondly. And I do think that there's a real tragedy, a travesty in the inability of our democracy, so-called, I'm using air quotes there, to meet the needs of the future when we have known now for 70 years of the greenhouse gas phenomenon. We've seen for nearly a century the very simple tension between the needs of human beings and the future on the one hand, and the opportunity for some number of executives and shareholders to enrich themselves on the other. And that should not be a complicated equation for well-meaning, thoughtful people to parse. And yet, this is where we find ourselves in 2024, as all of the climate models are breaking, as all of the tipping points are being met and hurdled beyond. We have now, in the world's largest, most well-resourced superpower, adopted a climate denier, and as our chief executive. And I don't have kids for a reason. I'm grateful not to have any kids. For people who do, I don't know what that's like. I don't know, man. I think it's really bleak. And I think that the best we can do is to connect with our neighbors to try to cushion each other from all of the pain that's going to come from this, train that we're all on.
Look, Shahid, thank you for being so real, so honest, so vulnerable. Look, it is coming. It's going to be bad. I'm not ready for it. My community's not ready for it. I don't think anybody is actually ready and fully. Like, what is coming is an empire dying, and it is going to, like, we're literally, I'm afraid, going to see like, the climate catastrophe is not coming. It's begun, and it's going to get worse. Now, I do think that there is still time not to avert the disaster, but to mitigate it, to make it less horrific. And part of the way you do that is to organize for changes in global and national policy, and simultaneously you build individual and community resilience. Now, I have no illusion that my little podcast, my little show, the work that I do is going to be has the agency to change national policy. I know that I have the ability to tell the truth as I see it. I have the ability to courageously confront reality, and I have the ability to do what I do on the day-to-day. And so, for me, as I come to the end of this program, Shahid, you have convinced me as the first order of business is get together with the people in your community and build authentic relationships, because those are the folks that you're going to be relying on when shit gets bad.
At least that, because there's that other layer of because beyond that, that's almost like a defensive way to think of it. And I absolutely presented it that way, and I feel that way. And also, when we connect with those people in community who are around us, so many beautiful things can happen. I think it's not just the way to defend each other from the local impacts of the mounting grand crises, but it's also, it's the way, when you were talking about hope, I find hope in my friends. I find inspiration in my community, and the people who teach me, and the people I share time with. And I feel like there's so much beauty that can be found in community, that the isolation that the market forces on us it makes it really hard to find. So even if it's just I don't know about the biggest, I'm struggling with adjectives here, one of the really crucial things that communities can share with each other, and this is the intersection of time and interpersonal connection. Like, we're all going to need therapy. Be each other's therapist, you know, like that's something all of us can do for our friends, and like just holding space for each other, you know, like, and everybody's got challenges that they're confronting. And so to normalize opportunities for people to share what their struggles are, to create those kinds of safe spaces and community that we don't have in the dominant culture, that is a profound act that takes no resources at all. You know, these kinds of ways, you know, that's not sharing food, that's not sharing clothes, that's not even a thing to share other than presence and curiosity. But those are such profound gifts that we can offer each other, even in a dark time. We're going to need all of the gifts that we can find and bring together, I think.
That is such a beautiful way to end this particular program, Shahid. So I am going to end it with deep and sincere gratitude and thanks to you. I want to thank Ruthie Engelke, my partner, who stepped in to help do the back end on this show, as well as Michael O'Neill and Callie Luna. I want to thank Jackrabbit Pollock, who helped to launch this podcast. And I want to let you and everybody else know, Ruthie and I are taking a break, y'all. Now, I'm actually doing a little traveling for organizing, and then Ruthie and I in December are going on a long-awaited, much-deserved vacation. But I'm going to tease you with this. We're coming back in January, and we're coming back on Democracy at Work's platform with Professor Rick Wolf. I am honored to have been asked to join that platform. So Redneck Gone Green is going to have new branding, new marketing, and the very first program is going to be a conversation with me, Harriet Fraud, a Marxist psychotherapist, and Professor Rick Wolf, arguably the most famous economic Marxist practicing in America today. So this is the last time that we'll actually be talking in 2024, but in 2025, the Redneck is coming on. We're coming back. We ain't going nowhere, y'all. Peace.